Hello once again, and welcome to another edition of the SaskAgToday.com Roundtable. We're joined by the Chief Agricultural Editor for SaskAgToday.com, Kevin Hursh, and the AgriNews Director for 620 CKRM Regina, Ryan Young. I'm your host, Doug Falconer from GX94 Yorkton, Agriculture Director here. And the first thing we wanted to talk about was something that started on Monday. We heard about the Sask Crops Forum was officially announced. There will be four, major crop announcements there. The AGMs will be held, in conjunction with the Crop Production Week in Saskatoon. And Kevin, you're going to be involved with that.
Yeah, I was pleased to be asked to moderate the meetings of the four groups, where they have some guest speakers and annual meetings. And really, things have evolved over time. It used to be Crop Week in conjunction with Crop Production Show, and then for a while we had the major groups doing something called Crop Sphere. Last year it evolved into a number of the annual meetings being held back to back at Western Development Museum, and a few being held in the halls at Prairieland Park. So now the groups have teamed up, four of the major groups into a Crops Forum event. So it'll be interesting to see the lineup as it's presented, and hopefully they'll get a really good turnout. I was skeptical last year, actually, when it's just back-to-back annual meetings without any guest speakers, that they wouldn't get very good attendance, but the attendance was quite good, and people stayed from one meeting to the next, and some really good discussions and some really good issues brought out. So looking forward to another great event.
And of course, we had the announcement of cattle prices this week, and I know, Ryan, you were on top of that. Looks like prices were up again this week.
Yeah, generally speaking, the cattle prices were up for the week ending October 18th, and they were up the previous week as well. So really good couple of weeks for Saskatchewan cattle prices. Most of the categories, they were able to get a price week over week, and the majority of the weight categories for feeder steers and heifers were up, maybe except for the odd one. But other than that, it's been pretty positive so far. And looking at the number of cattle marketed as well, generally speaking, that has ticked up over the last few weeks as the fall cattle run is starting in earnest now. But it's still slightly below what we've seen at this time last year, but still kind of on a positive trend as far as this year is concerned.
Kevin, I know you don't have cattle, but I'm sure you have a lot of friends who do. I'm sure they're fairly happy with prices right now.
I think prices are very buoyant, and it would be interesting to do a year-over-year comparison. I think we're probably even a little stronger than last year. And the peak cattle run might be a little later this year, just because grass has been good, the weather has been good. There's not the need that some areas had last year to get cattle marketed because feed or pasture was getting short. This year that's not a problem, but great to see the cattle industry thriving, and some decent profits in that sector. Up until the last few years, it was pretty lean trimmings, and costs have still remained very high. So this is where cattle prices need to be.
Now, we also had a story this week about global food and how the money from the Canadian Grain Commission will be distributed. And I guess some farmers might be a little disappointed with how that all turned out.
Yeah, Global Food and Ingredients had their license revoked way back in May. A number of unpaid producers filed claims with the Canadian Grain Commission. So the commission said 29 claims. There was $2 million in security, but more than 2.6 million, almost 2.7 million owing to producers. So producers are going to get only prorated payments, 75% of their claims. Now, the Canadian Grain Commission says it is working with the receiver for Global Food and Ingredients on the unsold grain inventory, and holds out the hope that there may be some additional money coming to producers from that. I'm surprised, because usually secured creditors are first in line, and there isn't any other money to distribute. But interesting that they would put that caveat in there, and I'm disappointed. You know, the Canadian Grain Commission missed the boat, or somebody missed the boat. There wasn't adequate security for this company to handle all of the unpaid producers, and that's certainly not what that program strives to do.
And Ryan, you had a chance to speak to Adam Picalo from Ventum Financial in Winnipeg a couple of times this week. First of all, about the Bank of Canada rate being cut by half a basis point, and then, of course, about canola and wheat futures. What was your take on your discussions with him this week?
Starting with the Bank of Canada announcement on Wednesday, it really came as no surprise to Picalo or any other economist worth their salt. They were expecting the central bank to reduce its key interest rate. Some were thinking it might have been a little more cautious by 25 basis points. Others were expecting a little more ambitious of 50 basis points, and that's what turned out to be the case. So half a percentage point to where it currently sits at 3.75%. One of the key takeaways was inflation. The inflation rate for September, a little lower than expected. The Bank of Canada typically likes to see that inflation rate at 2%. It's at 1.6%, but they've still indicated as well that more cuts could be on the way as long as inflation kind of stays within that 1 to 3% range. A few factors that go into it, from their forecast of gross domestic product increasing for the next 3 years, between 1 and 3% as well between now and 2026. Another is the economy grew slightly by 2% in the first half of 2024, and some external factors as well that kind of tipped the scales, so to speak, in the Bank of Canada making its decision to reduce it. So Picalo sees interest rate cuts going further. But again, just kind of all depends on several factors, including inflation and others as well. And then getting into the canola and wheat prices, canola is still doing pretty well. It was up this week overall, following a positive trend from the previous week, as well as wheat. Kind of the opposite. Last week it was kind of plateauing, and today it kind of went down by about 6 cents a bushel. Not sure where it closed exactly on Friday for both, but one of the things that he said that kind of stood out to him, especially when it came to canola, was how high palm oil prices are, at the highest point that he's seen in quite a while. So that's definitely one of the factors that he saw. It was kind of a short conversation. He was a little bit under the weather today, but those were some of the things that he noticed this week.
Kevin, your take on the Bank of Canada rate, will that impact farmers much? And also, of course, the marketing when it comes to selling canola and wheat here over the winter.
Certainly, when the Bank of Canada cuts its rate setting interest rate, it affects the entire lending scenario. So producers should be able to look forward to somewhat lower interest rates as they make new loans or lock in existing loans in the future. I have difficulty knowing if the economy stays soft and inflation stays below target and they keep cutting rates and it doesn't change that. I'm not sure what tools they will have. I'm just not as convinced as some economists seem to be about the overall economic effect of the Bank of Canada rate. I don't think it's quite as significant as what some of the economists believe. But certainly on canola, we've seen a tremendous increase. If you look back over the last 2 months in the price of canola, that has changed the picture on that crop dramatically. And there's many people that believe, Agriculture Canada cut its estimate of canola carryover in Canada, but there's many analysts believe it's still too high and that carryover is going to be much tighter than projected. So there may still at some point be some fireworks in the canola pricing.
Now, as for the Manitoba crop report, it was their final crop report came out this week. 95% of harvest done in Manitoba. They're saying it's mainly corn and sunflowers that are still out there. But I know when I spoke with our guy in Northwest Manitoba, James Fry, he said there's still a little bit of canola out there as well. So does that surprise you that there's still that much out?
There's some significant work to be done. It's getting late enough in the year you'd have thought that they would have cleaned that up. Now, especially on canola, but if you get some stuff that just doesn't cure properly, maybe you've left it standing for straight cutting and it's just not maturing for you. The stems are still too green, and then some of them on those longer season crops like corn and soybeans and sunflowers, there's not much you can do. You just have to wait for Mother Nature to let you get a crack at them.
All right, and then of course, Ryan, you attended a news conference regarding wetlands for tomorrow. What was that all about?
Yeah, it's a coalition group called Wetlands for Tomorrow. They're similar to the Saskatchewan Alliance of Water Sustainability. They held a news conference to call on all political parties to make water quality and wetland conservation an election issue. But one of the things that kind of stood out to me the most was just the timing of this news conference and announcement. Now that we're kind of in the final days of the election campaign, we're just a few days out from the last day of voting, which is on Monday, the 28th, and polls will close at 8 o'clock Sask time, and we'll find out within the next hour or two who's going to form government. But nonetheless, the timing is kind of interesting. But when I was talking with one of the members of the coalition group, Lauren Scott, who may sound familiar to some, he said that it was just merely a coincidence that their call comes as an election is on, and he basically said, regardless of who forms government, the issue of wetlands and preserving them are very important, and they provide a number of benefits to the province as a whole, not the least of which water quality, as well as a place where waterfowl and migratory birds can go for sanctuary, and a whole host of other benefits as well. And they just want to make sure that that's front and center. They feel that the Sask party really hasn't done a really good job of taking that seriously enough. Now, of course, we know that they have the ag water stewardship policy that's still in development, and there was a few pilot projects that took place over the summer and fall, and should be following up with the Water Security Agency soon once the campaign is over, just to see how things are going and what kind of feedback they got. There's some concern with that as well, particularly when it comes to enforcement of illegal drainage and drainage activities. That's another concern as well pertaining to wetlands. You drain that, you lose the wetland altogether. So they just want to make sure that there's kind of a healthy balance of proper drainage, and if there is drainage, that there's discussions about whether you could move that wetland to another area so that there's no loss. I believe one of the experts there, Dr. Carrie Finley with the University of Regina, called it a no net drainage policy. That was another ask that the group is looking for. And then a couple of other things too, just open and transparent reporting from the WSA and the provincial government, because they feel that obviously they don't feel that it's transparent enough and nobody knows what's going on. So all that kind of ties in together, a lot of moving parts, but essentially they're just looking for a provincial wetland conservation policy.
And what do you think of this whole wetlands for tomorrow thing, Kevin?
Well, certainly they make some good points. I think if you talk to producers, I think most would agree that preserving wetlands is a great goal. Although some of the preservation of wetlands that go dry every year and is maybe not nearly as useful as some others. I think producers should actually be paid for preserving wetlands. If it's a public good, there should be some parameters around public support to preserve wetlands. And right now, you don't really see much of that. You see a little bit of it with some of the programming, but I think that if it's the priority that the public deems that worthy, there should be some money to support that, because from a producer's point of view, cultivated acre is a cultivated acre, and a wetland acre doesn't pay the bills. So I think that there's been these sorts of discussions about paying for environmental goods and services over the years, but it's never amounted to much beyond just some pilot projects, and perhaps that's the discussion that needs to continue.
And just to kind of add too, they made it clear as well at the news conference they're not painting anyone as a particular bad guy or anything. Especially Lauren Scott, who said that they're not painting a negative bad stroke for the Water Security Agency, especially for the employees there who are just doing their job and utilizing what they have in terms of funding and resources. And they're also not pointing the finger at farmers to blame although there may be some farmers who may be doing illegal drainage, and that should be enforced. But it's not just it's everybody's fault that that wetlands aren't being preserved. It's more of a political issue than anything.
Another event coming up here next week here in Yorkton is the 35th annual Grain Millers Harvest Showdown. Now it's a grain and cattle show. And I've heard in the past that there's not a whole lot of grain shows out there in Saskatchewan anymore. I'm not sure if you're aware of any, Kevin or Ryan, on that.
There used to be a grain show at Canadian Western Agribition, and then it's morphed into the Grain Expo, a speaking event or information event rather than an actual grain show or grain competition. They did have that for a number of years at Agribition. Harvest Showdown in Yorkton is the only one remaining that I'm aware of.
Yeah, even in my time in Yorkton, that's pretty much the only place where I've heard such a grain show is at Harvest Showdown.
Yeah, it'll be running Wednesday through Saturday on the Yorkton Exhibition Grounds, free admission, except for the professional bull riding Friday, Saturday night. You have to get tickets for that, and I heard that tickets are going rather quickly for that. So anyone out there who wants to go, better get them soon. And then the last thing we wanted to talk about was the Saskatchewan election Monday night. We've had the chance to start voting as early as Tuesday, and we'll be voting Friday as well as Saturday. No voting on Sunday, but then of course the full election day Monday. We were going to just go around the table. What are people predicting? What's going to happen in the Saskatchewan election? Should we start with you, Kevin?
I've changed my prediction. I believe that the polls are showing that the NDP has momentum and is actually ahead in some of the polls I've seen as compared to the Sask party. And there's heavy interest in early voting, which usually means a change, that people want a change. And so I've changed my idea from a reduced Sask party majority to believing that the NDP will form government on Monday night, and that will precipitate the resignation of Scott Moe. If that, and this is just somebody's guess, an outsider observing. I've been around a while. I remember in my early days as a reporter being in Estevan, Saskatchewan, the night the Grant Devine government swept to power. And again, a big surprise because the NDP had been in government for many years. They seemed unassailable, but that was a huge election victory at that time for the Conservative Party under Grant Devine. And people should have seen it coming just because the momentum was switching and people were wanting a change. And whether it's right, whether it's wrong, I'm not saying passing judgment on how people vote. But I do think that if there is an NDP government formed, that there will be a lot of farm organizations wishing they had spent more time cultivating relationships with the NDP rather than believing the Sask party was going to be government for another term.
Ryan, your prediction?
Well, mine is a little bit different from Kevin's. I was kind of surprised to hear Kevin's prediction going into this roundtable, so it's very interesting. My prediction, I still think the Saskatchewan Party will have a majority government, although I think it's going to be slightly less majority government than what they currently had going into this campaign. While historically, after 10 years, people usually do have a hunger for change, and I understand that, but I believe that there's just too strong of support from the rural areas in Saskatchewan that the Sask party can get those constituencies and have enough to retain power. And I also don't think the NDP has done enough in the rural areas to, kind of sway voters the other way. And also thinking about farmers too, especially, I know I've talked to a few farmers, back home and some of the other previous generations. They don't have a very nice opinion about the NDP, and they tend to hold on to that and never forget that. So I think there's still a lot of work the NDP has to do to try and reverse that for the long term if they have a chance of picking up more momentum and forming government. Although I do believe the NDP will have more momentum in the cities like Regina, Saskatoon, maybe up in Prince Albert. That's one of the key battlegrounds there. Yorkton, maybe, although historically I don't think that that seat is going to change anytime soon. But overall, I think that the Sask Party will have a majority government, but slightly less than what they had before.
What's
And
your opinion, Doug?
I'm thinking it'll be a Sask Party government, but with a very small majority. I'm expecting the NDP to really close the gap on them. I mean, you know, those Regina and Saskatoon seats can flip really easily there. And the rural ones tend to be more Sask Party. But yeah, I can see a lot of ones in Regina and Saskatoon flipping. So it could be very interesting, I think, on election night, especially Regina and Saskatoon. That's going to be who decides who we're going to have for government as of Monday night. So,
Well, if I'm wrong, I owe you guys drinks, and vice versa.
We'll hold you to it.
all right, well, that'll do it for another edition of the SaskAgToday.com Roundtable. On behalf of the Chief Agricultural Editor for SaskAgToday.com, Kevin Hursh, and 620 CKRM Regina AgriNews Director Ryan Young, I'm GX94 Yorkton Agriculture Director Doug Falconer saying so long until next time.